Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Block Chat. Today, it's Denis Petrovcic, your host, and we have an amazing project with us today that is soon to hit our Launchpad. This project is based out of Canada. We haven't had any marketplace project launching on the Launchpad from that jurisdiction, and I'm really excited to present the founder, Emmanuel, to our community. So, Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us here on an episode of Blockchain, which is a bi-weekly show we do at Block Square. Usually, it's Makram Honey, our COO, doing the presentation. He's not feeling too well this week, so I'm taking over. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to do my part. Emmanuel, thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, I'd love for our community, we had conversations, prior to, signing agreements, getting you through the approval process to come on the Launchpad. And so, I feel like now I know you, in a way, and hopefully, sometime we can maybe even meet face to face because we're doing these things more or less virtually these days, right? But for our community, who is Emmanuel Paul?
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for having me here. So my background, I'm a computer engineer. I used to work in Silicon Valley, and I moved to Canada about 21 years ago into finance, and I'm a designated accountant in Ontario, which is one of the largest provinces in Canada, and BC. My background has traditionally been management consulting and capital markets. So I have a boutique private equity fund here in Toronto. We help junior companies actually go public, raise capital, provide fractional CEO, CFO experience, and market awareness campaigns for them. So I come from the traditional finance world, and for me, I have started and exited out of multiple companies in different sectors over the years. And I've always been looking for opportunities to enhance and provide value to some of the sectors which I'm very passionate about. And social housing is one of those sectors for me. I have been involved in building social homes since 2012. I've traveled around the world. I've been to more than about 50 countries. Building social houses. We have a unique Canadian technology which we use to build these homes, and it's a very fast way of implementing homes. The challenge, as which you know, is to raise capital, right? So that is always been the issue because it's very glamorous. I live in Toronto, Canada. And it's very easy to raise $1 billion to build a nice glitzy downtown condo here in a condo building in Toronto. But if you say you want to build a social housing project, it's going to be very difficult to actually convince people that this is a worthy cause for them to invest, even though the financial metrics is actually fairly good, right? So I think for me, I was looking for different opportunities to do it, and tokenization and bringing those projects on chain is actually, to me, was the future, right? I mean, that is essentially how most projects are going to get funded in the future. And I think I want to kind of build the building blocks for it. So that's how SORS Capital actually was formed.
And, coming from this traditional angle, right? As you explained, when did you first kind of get the first spark in when it comes to tokenizing assets like real estate? When was the first time you kind of encountered this? And
that's actually a good question, because I actually was looking at it in 2016. I actually came to Dubai. I was working with an exchange which just started up there, and they wanted to actually tokenize the asset. But the problem with at that point was we didn't have the full tech stack, right? We didn't have the We didn't have the exchanges which we needed. We didn't have the custodial wallet ecosystem, which is as well developed as it is right now. And obviously, we didn't have a streamlined, sophisticated partner like Block Square at that point, right? So there was a lot of missing pieces, and you had to like custom build them instead of just bolting them on right now to kind of provide a solution. And you can layer your own solution on top of multiple technology solutions from different partners. I think that level of sophistication wasn't there. But I've been kept trying. I've been going to conferences around the world, and I've been trying to educate myself with what's the latest trends and latest greatest partners who are coming on chain. And then I think now is the right time, I think, for us to launch a platform like this, because it's going to be a phenomenal opportunity in the next 5 to 10 years, I think.
So you've been kind of eyeing the tokenization part for almost as long as I have, in a way, right? I remember 2016, 2017, the notion of tokenizing real estate was really kind of spinning in my head every time I went out running. This was all I could think about for some reason, even though running seemed to be like the quiet time for me. It just, I just could not think about it. And yeah, as you mentioned, there was a lot of things missing at the time. Definitely, there was nothing that we have today. And somebody might say, well, the blockchain is still the blockchain, right? It was there at the time, it's there now. But essentially, also the understanding of what you need, or how this piece of technology needs to be adapted to accommodate tokenized real estate in an efficient way. I think that part was the crucial that was missing. Today we have clarity and understanding as well on the regulator side. People know that this is something that is happening. It's not something that a couple kids have imagined to do in the future, but it's something that everybody in the financial sector is actually quite eager to see, because potentially the volumes, transactional volumes that could come through this process are enormous. Another thing you mentioned, and I really want to talk about this because a lot of people don't really understand the social housing challenges. You mentioned them briefly, but I really wanted to go into the meat of social housing, and kind of where do you see the biggest challenge, you coming traditionally, why is it so hard to raise for social housing? What are the main points there? And on the other side, with tokenization, where do you see this could unblock the situation?
Sure. That's a great question. So when I first moved to Canada, I worked in the traditional real estate developer ecosystem. We built the Shangri-La in Toronto. We built the Shangri-La in Vancouver. We built the Fairmont for Pacific Rim. We used to basically do a pre-sale, and people used to line up. And as you know, Toronto is one of the most expensive markets for real estate in the world, and Vancouver as well. And people used to just buy it, right? So there was no shortage of demand side, right? But over the period of the last 15 years to 20 years, what has happened is social housing, which is economically weaker section of the society, which is like people who have low income, it has kind of encompassed itself to a much larger segment of the population, which includes senior housing, student housing, refugee and immigrant housing, disability housing. So the scope of what you call social housing has radically changed from when it was 2003 to when it was 2024, right? Which brings a lot of challenges to the government, right? For example, in Canada, we have about 650,000 social housing units, according to Canada, the CMHC, which is Canadian Mortgage Corporation of Canada. It's a database. We need about 3.5 million units by the end of 2030, right? So the cities and the provinces are severely, and including the federal government, have been severely stressed in bringing these to online. And the challenge in a country like Canada is, in essence, real estate is very expensive. The land is expensive. The cost of construction is expensive. So for you to bring a product online, which is affordable to people, it needs to kind of have a very different approach than what you would do in, say, Central America or South America or in Africa, right? Where you have a lot more land to work with and a lot more resources to work with, right? So one of the very first developments which I was part of is called Woodward's redevelopment in east side of Vancouver, where it was a project, one of its kind, where we had affordable housing and market housing in the same building, right? We kind of used a whole block of Vancouver to build affordable housing on one side, which is facing, let's say the east side, and the west side used to be market housing. So it actually, the market housing helped to pay for the affordable housing side and subsidize the cost of those buildings. So it was a very innovative approach, and I think those kind of mixed use projects, I want to call it, it's what's going to be the solution provider. And it also, the government has started to incentivize developers to build more of those mixed housing projects where they can actually allocate a percentage, like 10 or 15% of their projects towards social housing. Now, this is where something like tokenizing the project comes into play, because we would be able to. Traditionally, it is like you have to have a lot of capital to be involved in real estate, right? I mean, you need to be able to invest a lot of money, and and the thing is, you're also very illiquid. Now, in terms of bringing liquidity to that marketplace, in terms of bringing fractional owner to that marketplace, we can reach a much more wider audience, right? And they would be able to participate in this social costs, I want to say, in terms of bringing housing as a solution. Not just in Canada, even in the United States, we have about 1.5 million social housing units, and we need about, I think, 3 or 4 times that number, right? So it's a crisis, and I mean, as you can probably heard the news, people are living under the bridges, people are tenting in camps. So this is essentially a very, very pressing issue for us in North America, and I think it's around the world. So by bringing latest technology solutions to the fundraising platform, right, we give opportunity to people not just in Canada, but people from around the world can participate in creating these new ecosystem. And this is very, and the difference between this and traditional market housing is the rental income you're going to get is very, very sticky. People don't leave. People don't pay their rent. They have very, very good, tenants, and they're very sticky, right? So the yield is very consistent, very constant, and you'll be able to have, very good risk mitigation strategy when you invest in social housing as opposed to market housing, when there's a lot of fluctuations, there's a lot of turnovers in the units, right?
So essentially, it's like when it comes to social housing, what people sometimes think that this is housing for the poor in a way, which is, I think, in one way it's the wrong way of looking at this. There's, because of people coming to bigger cities, let's say, or more urbanized areas from other parts, they're seeking equality of opportunity when it comes to finding a job, securing a good school system for their kids, education, right? And when you migrate from one place to another, getting a good credit score is hard. So it's hard for you to actually acquire a property, and it might need maybe even a whole generation for the next generation to be able to actually purchase. So social housing is basically there to support this part of the population sometimes that is coming to a new, bigger city and is looking for a place to live. And because the commercial residential market might have very high monthly costs because of how it's built, not just because of the lease agreement you have, but all the costs that come with it might be bring the bill up. And for somebody who just came to a certain region, they might need to live on a more modest paycheck until they maybe find a better one, or and so all those reasons are not really easy for people to tackle, and for municipalities to actually be successful in offering safe place to live to people who want to move to a certain city. But you also mentioned other parts of the population, which is elderly, the elderly housing and student housing as well. So do you think that when it comes to social housing, this is something that is being addressed properly in Canada right now, or do you think that there's a big lack in those areas as well?
Well, when it comes to addressing any of one of those subsets of housing, I don't think we have a complete coverage by any stretch of imagination, right? There's severe shortage in affordable housing in the senior segment of the population. Student housing is a lot of shortages. We need to have way more student housing than what we have right now, which is affordable, right? Because as he's mentioned, and as I remember being as a student in university, I couldn't afford to pay a lot of rent. So, but if I didn't actually stay in the town and get my degree, I wouldn't do what I'm doing right now, right? So it's very important to actually provide affordable housing to students so that you get the next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs, built out. And another segment of the population is disability housing. Like, people don't really focus much on it, but there's a lot of need for long-term care facilities, long-term housing for population which has a disability. So I think there's a when you talk about investing in these sectors in Canada, there is not much streamlined approach to essentially focus on them, right? Government is trying to do some things, and there's private public sector partnerships, but it does not have a formalized structure where capital can flow in, and it creates a level of efficiency in deploying the capital and getting the results. And I think that this kind of solution, which SORS Capital is trying to provide, is essentially what's needed, where institutional investors, retail investors, private and high net worth investors can all be comfortable in making sure, listen, I want to allocate 5% of my portfolio towards social causes, and I want to actually invest in these programs which provides housing to senior citizens, provides housing to low-income families or immigrants and refugees. You have a direct impact. This is impact investing. You're really creating a difference in people's lives by providing housing. To me, is huge. I mean, I've gone around the world and I've seen how having a house is so important, because it brings people out of the current level to much higher levels by providing them opportunities to go to school, get have a clean space for them to go to work, have a family, raise kids. This is a big issue, which I think we all need to kind of focus and create a solution for.
Do you see tokenization maybe being able to impact on, you mentioned in certain countries you have a vast space where you can build, while, maybe in Western countries, this space is more limited. But is it really, or is it because people just want to live so close to the infrastructure of a bigger city? Do you see tokenization potentially impacting that developments might happen even outside of those big hubs, where everybody's trying to be present there, just because all the capital is concentrated there? So you are kind of bound to build as closer to a more liquid market because of investors. Do you think tokenization might have an impact where you can find opportunity outside of that, outside of Toronto, for instance, but go into a town nearby, which also is just is great to live in, but you would never be able to raise capital traditionally to build a social housing unit there?
So that's actually a great question. People live where they actually can make a living, right? I mean, where they can have a job, right? And big cities tend to be those places where when people come in, they can get a job fairly easily. They can make a monthly income to pay for expenses. Why is there an attraction to big cities like Toronto, London, New York? Is because I think we've taken about 50% of the immigrants who come to Canada, just in Toronto, right? And the reason for that is because there's a lot of jobs here, a lot of opportunities, right? This is where I think the government and private sector have to work together to create these kind of opportunities in smaller cities, right? Where they have manufacturing hubs, where they have technology hubs. Now, Canada is kind of getting a little bit better at that. Like, for example, we have a Waterloo-Kitchener corridor where we have a lot of tech hub forming, almost like a northern Silicon Valley. We have manufacturing hubs, which is outside of Toronto. So this creates opportunities for people to have a living in those cities. And then creating housing there is obviously going to be a much easier task, because you're going to have a cheaper cost of construction, so you'll be able to provide. So I think the economics of how people are going to move out of these big cities where there's high cost of living is by providing them affordable living and good quality of life and good jobs. So, and schools and hospitals and other infrastructures, right? People want to just kind of, they don't have to come to Toronto for anything. They don't have to come to Toronto to go to a hospital. They don't have to come to Toronto. If you can provide that infrastructure. So it's almost like you have to think about social housing solutions, which have actually championed a lot around the world, is you have to build communities. You have to build a community. Community involves, opportunities for jobs, have schools, hospitals, and housing becomes part of that solution, right? So when you're talking about, moving away from big cities and helping move into smaller cities, this is great. Now, what the advantage of doing that is you've got an absolutely clean slate to build it however you want. And this is where tokenization comes into play, where I really think capital can be efficiently deployed instead of having all these red tapes, that you can create an absolutely easy way for you to essentially create an impact in a community in a very short amount of time by doing tokenization, because it essentially helps deploy capital much efficiently into those regions.
Now, we've come to a point of the blockchain where I'd really like to shift now the focus. We talked about, yourself as a founder, SORS Capital, what, social housing basically in Canada, right? That this is, there's certain KPIs that have been agreed and, will be presented to our community in the forum announcement. And what is the roadmap? What do you see, SORS Capital? What is the next steps? Obviously, now we're, concentrating on the launch campaign, of course, but we finished with the launch campaign successfully. What's next?
So for us, we want to build out an ecosystem of properties, which is essentially going to provide a lot of value, not only to the community, but to the developer, and most importantly, the investment community. Right? Most of these projects are pre-revenue projects, which, when people are trying to raise traditionally, they're trying to build projects which is still not completed. Cash flow is not really visible or secure. So when we wanted to do this, we wanted to do this differently, right? We wanted to do it with an existing project, which has already been in operation for a long time, where the cash flow is stable. Right. So the first project we're building coming online is called Centertown Apartments. It was built in 2012 using 3 levels of government support: provincial, which is our state government; city, it's in the city of London, which is a beautiful city about 2 hours west of Toronto; and the federal government of Canada. And that project is focused on providing housing to senior citizens. And it has been operational since 2012 to 2024. So we have a steady stream of cash flow, not just this year. We're talking about a decade of steady cash flow, right? Yeah. So the developer is a very good close friend of mine, known him for a number of years. He has other properties in London where he wants to develop mixed-use housing, similar to what I discussed. So we're using the property which we're tokenizing the project which has been there in existence, whereby de-risking the risk for the investors to be able to get a steady cash flow, but also supporting the developer by giving him capital to go and build more of these projects, right? So we're taking a different approach to how we want to raise capital. We're using existing performing projects to raise capital and use it for more, I want to call it riskier, stage of the capital deployment, and get sure that that actually is done. And then once that project goes live, we want to bring it on chain. So we have a very different approach of slow, methodical way of bringing projects online. And we want to create value from day one. It's not 6 months from now. It's not for a year from now. You have cash flow from the moment we actually have a minimum threshold of investment funded, right? So I think that is essentially how we want to kind of roll out our metrics. And our KPIs has been like, first year we got to hit a $25 million target, which I think is not even going to be an issue even in the first 3 to 6 months. But I think what is more important is to make sure we bring in the projects, we get the community to understand what we're doing here and get a difference view of viewing social housing, which is most important thing to me, is to take away that this kind of projects can create above normal returns, right? And it does, and the only thing is, and it also most importantly creates social impact, right? It's essentially going to make a difference. So I think we're very confident in how we're approaching this solution we're bringing forward. So.
I think you mentioned here a couple of things that check my boxes when I look into something, because you mentioned one important thing. I see a lot of projects who are trying to do everything from scratch. Having the ability to tokenize an existing cash flowing asset, extract liquidity for the owner, versus giving a cash flowing asset in the hands of the investors on the other side. Right, so the principal owner versus the token investors, it's an exchange of risks, like you mentioned, right? So a higher risk for a lower risk, right? Somebody is coming in when everything is settled. It has a track record. It has data to support it. So it's a nice bet that you can do. And to deploy capital that's going to kind of yield on a regular basis. On the other end, the investor is able to, exit a portion of their equity position in that asset to be able to reinvest it onto a different development where the risk is higher, because it's an early stage phase. And so I think this is kind of the way how tokenization should be utilized today by most property owners, to be able to extract some liquidity, potentially if they have larger portfolios, instead of trying to extract a larger portion from a single asset, trying to give the investor community on the other end the ability to diversify across multiple assets, maybe localities and so forth, but being able to have smaller stakes in a portfolio. Holding 5-10 properties is much a better situation than having the same amount invested into a single one. So I think if you're able to look at and work with your partners on the real estate side and get them to understand this point, I think you might get a long way, because it's something that they cannot find on the market. The only way of doing it is through debt, and debt actually increases risk on your asset, because it's usually a fixed income product for the other side, the creditor, and market situations might also change. So with the way we're tokenizing real estate at BlockSquare, I think those risks are not present in the deal, and I think it might go a long way. We also touch upon community, and we have the last, let's say, 5 minutes of our show today, but we talked a bit about community, and we're basically doing this block chat for our community of BlockSquare. Do you have any kind of last remarks, anything you wanted to tell our community in terms of source capital, how they can maybe reach out to you, learn more about it. Obviously, besides asking questions on our forum, there's also other ways of getting in touch with Source Capital.
Yeah, I mean, we have. I mean, obviously, I'm open to any questions or further comments on any of the material which I presented today. But I'm happy to answer any questions in any of the forums, whether it's Discord channels, whether it's Telegram, whether it's WhatsApp, there's LinkedIn. We're going to have a fairly open dialogue about educating the community about what social housing investing is and what impact investing is, and also to basically highlight the de-risking portion of investing in an asset which has already been performing, right? I think that is the most key thing. And we want to bring on such more quality projects like this from Canada, which essentially is one of the most secure real estate investment countries in the world, right? I mean, there's billions of dollars which is coming into Canada every single year. Now we get to democratize that capital and actually be able to have smaller chunks of capital being deployed, like you said, for diversification. And on the other side of that spectrum, it creates liquidity for the developers to be able to go and do more of these projects and bring them more online. And we have a huge amount of government support for something like this, which is also important, right? Both at the the state, provincial level, and at the federal level. So I think we will have a huge amount of wind behind our sails if our community supports our projects and grow with us in terms of bringing bigger and bigger projects, and show to the government that this is a new way of raising capital. This is a new way of doing things, right? Because traditional bureaucratic ecosystem doesn't understand what blockchain is. And so by our community supporting us and actually showing that here is a viable solution for the problems you guys are having, I would be able to go and champion the cause and get us more more subsidies, more capital, along with the investor capital, which essentially enhances the returns for the investors on a long-term basis. So I think it's a win-win-win situation, and I like to actually look at solutions which are win-win-win, and I think this is going to be a good partnership going forward.
Emmanuel, thanks so much for coming to the show. First of all, thanks so much for giving us your valuable time. I learned quite a lot about social housing, about the situation in Canada. So it's London, Canada, by the way. And I'm really looking forward to see you succeed on our Launchpad. I hope our community will, be supportive of what you're trying to bring to this, one of the leading economies in the world, and one of the most, thriving cities, Toronto. But to our community, look for the posts on the forum page. Go there, ask questions. There's actually no stupid question. We're all learning here, and sharing, will allow us and those who usually don't engage with a question to maybe get something answered and have a better understanding. Launch date is to be announced. So make sure to follow our socials for the announcement and prepare your stake BST for that campaign. Was a pleasure to be here today. Paul, Emmanuel Paul, thank you so much again, and see you on the Launchpad.
Thank you, Denis. It's been a pleasure as always.